Water Issues Seminar. About a year and a half ago, I was telling Bruce here this morning, Bruce Henningsgaard, I was down in the Rochester wastewater treatment plant doing some sampling, and I was talking to one of the operators down there, and one thing led to another, and she was telling me that during rain events, during heavy storm events, they got some enormous amount of water through their wastewater treatment plant, like 12 times their normal flow, or some amazing number. And I could hardly believe that. And she was saying how much of a problem it posed to the wastewater treatment plant. Well, I didn't know anything about that. And so when I heard Kyle Colvin here covered in a story on Minnesota Public Radio, what was it, a couple of months ago, I think, Kyle, on this very issue, I thought, we got to hear from Kyle because this is an important thing. And so it's great to have Kyle here to talk about inflow and infiltration, the sewers. He has been working for Met Council Environmental Services for, it says here, 31 years. And he's been involved with and responsible for several regional programs related to regional wastewater systems, such as flow cost allocation process, regional wastewater system planning, including the capital program, local comprehensive plan review, MCES geographical information service activities, and the regional inflow and infiltration program that I think you're going to hear about today. He says in his spare time, he travels and competes in Highland bagpipe competitions throughout the U.S. and Canada. Kyle, it's great to have you with us to talk about this really important subject. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. As Mark indicated, I've been with the council now for 31 years and really involved in the council's regional I&I program that really the current program started in 2004, but it really had its early beginnings back in the mid 1980s, and I'll get into that here in the presentation. And so today, what I'll be doing is giving kind of a broad overview history of the regional I&I program. How it started, what the catalyst was, what some of the activities have been, both through local communities and also regional activities, and then indicate what some of the challenges have been, what some of the focuses and progress made in financial assistance to help do mitigation work. And then recently there was a change in the statute that actually allows the council to focus attention from a financial resource standpoint on addressing I&I mitigation efforts on private property sources. So just a little bit of background, who we are. The council includes the operating agency of the regional wastewater collection and treatment system. The regional wastewater system provides service to the 7-county metropolitan area that's defined by statute. We provide wholesale service to 111 communities that are connected to and provided service through the regional system. We bill communities, and then as a wholesaler, then those communities then in turn pass those charges on to the individual users within the community. We provide service to a little over 2.8 million people, which is pretty impressive when you consider that's about half of the entire state's population just here in the metro area that we provide service to. Our treatment facility portfolio includes 9 wastewater treatment plants. Our smallest plant is the East Bethel plant in northern Anoka County. That plant has a 0.4 MGD capacity. We are currently operating at about 60 to 80,000 gallons per day in service. And then our largest facility is located in St. Paul here, the Metropolitan treatment plant. and that treats on average, I think, about 180 million gallons per day on an average day. So a pretty wide spread in our treatment facilities, the amount of service that those 9 facilities provide service to. We've got a little over 110 miles of interceptors. These are the large diameter pipes that provides the service to communities. Communities connect to those with local trunk sewers to provide service to the businesses and homes within each community. Overall, collectively, we collect and treat on average 250 million gallons per day. And our organization includes over 600 employees to perform those services. The present worth of all of our collected assets is about $7 billion. It's important to note that that's not the replacement cost. That's just the current value of the assets that we currently have on and in ground. It would cost multiple times that to actually replace the system that we have today. And we have an annual capital program of about $150 million per year. Just to start off with a couple of definitions, what exactly is I&I? It's the acronym that stands for inflow and infiltration. These are the basically the 2 ways that clear water, storm water, surface water that can enter the wastewater collection system. Inflow generally comes in through openings, cracks in pipes, through in between the joints and manholes, through casting, the interface of castings and the riser sections, the cone section of manhole structures. Generally, I'm sorry, that's infiltration. Generally, infiltration is low levels. It's usually a sustained adds to the base flow. I've got a chart to kind of better describe it here on the next slide. But generally speaking, it doesn't really impact system capacity much, but it can over time lead to large volumes of wastewater, can impact the wastewater volumes to the point where it can affect communities' bills that have to pay for the collection and treatment of that flow. Then we have inflow sources, and those are sources that get introduced into the system very quickly. Sump pumps opening in structures that might be influenced or susceptible to area flooding. Usually very high rates of flow enters the system, but not much in terms of a volumetric. So generally speaking, it doesn't impact a community's total volume and their bills, but it can have severe negative implications on the system's ability to actually convey and treat that flow. We can overtax the system capacity, hydraulic capacity of the collection and treatment systems. This chart here really depicts those 3 systems that I alluded to exists. In the blue bottom portion of this is the large diameter pipes that the council owns and operates that provide service to the communities. They're generally very large. I think the smallest one we have is a 9-inch pipe up in the Lake Minnetonka area. And then we've got 2 12-foot rectangular barrels that come into the Metro plant here in just south of the downtown area of South St. Paul. Then we have the local collection systems, the city municipal owned systems. Those are kind of what's depicted here in the street section on this map. And then there's the private collection system that's that home service between the house that conveys flow from the individual property structure and then makes connection to the city line that's typically in the street. The sources here on this chart is also again identified. In the public system, you've got faulty manhole covers, frames, and then also cross connections with stormwater, here in the Twin Cities, historically, there were three municipalities that originally were combined sewers: Minneapolis, St. Paul, and South St. Paul, small area of South St. Paul. And beginning in the 80s through really the 2000s, there was continual progress made on separating those sewers to the point where just a couple of years ago, the council negotiated with the EPA for termination of its CSO permit. So we had gone 10 years without having any bypasses to the receiving rivers that these existing overflow structures covered under the CSO permit would at least acknowledge the existence. And so with the absence of overflows, we were able to negotiate the termination of our CSO permit. I believe it's one of the first large metropolitan areas to actually do so in the country. So we're pretty proud of that fact. And then here on this chart here, we also indicate or delineate inflow sources and infiltration sources. So again, it kind of gives you a sense that inflow sources are those high rates, sump pump connections. You can have perimeter foundation drains. You can get roof leaders that are connected to the wastewater collection system. Most of those have been eliminated, as I indicated, through the efforts of those three communities who were once combined. They have separated the vast majority of the rain leaders. So that's those sources aren't that prevalent anymore. And then again, the infiltration sources really are more characteristic of facilities that are aging. Joints will open up, pipes can crack, and allow groundwater to enter the system. And of course, once these waters do enter the wastewater collection system, it gets commingled, can't be separated out, and requires both the conveyance through the system and then treatment at the wastewater treatment plants. So the council owns and operates over 200 sanitary sewer flow meters in the regional collection system. The primary purpose of these measuring devices is to allocate the wastewater flow volumes to assist in our billing process that we mail out to communities, but we also use it to measure peak flows that are coming from each community and contributing to the regional collection system. So here is actually a graph of data of an actual meter facility, and on this you can see on the bottom line you'll see that that's the actual flow data. So it's the measured flow, and so on this particular chart in August, there was a rain event, and you can see that the flow rate responded very significantly to that rain event. Prior to that, you can see where the average flow was a little under 0.1 MGD or 100,000 gallons per day. You can also pick up that typical diurnal pattern that you see coming from a community where you've got the morning high peaks where everybody's getting ready for work, taking showers, whatever, and then midday it kind of trails off, and then around 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, depending on the community, it peaks again when people are return back home and start doing laundry and preparing meals and that. So you can see that prior to the peak. The other thing to note on here is that the 0.1 MGD is what's typical on an average day basis. When wastewater collection systems are designed, they're designed to accommodate peak flows that can be generated within the service area. And there are standard design guidelines that have been adopted really since the 60s that helps guide the sizing of these facilities. to accommodate these peak flows. And the council back in the 70s adopted this design. We call it peak flow factors. It was adopted, as I indicated, in the 70s. It's very, very comparable to the ASCE standard calculations for peak flow factors, and also 10 state standards. In fact, the council's peak flow factors actually is a little more lenient. It provides for capacity in a little greater amounts than the 10 state standards or the ASCE standard. So, but the key point here is that if you look back at this chart, there is an acceptable amount of I&I that was accommodated when these systems were first designed and sized to accommodate for communities' existing flow and future growth. However, as indicated in this chart here, during certain communities and certain service areas do respond significantly during wet weather events. And so in this chart here, what this is identifying is that level of flow rate that is above our standard design guides, which on this chart here we refer to as the I&I goal. And so I'll be covering this a little bit earlier, but back in 2004, when the system was experiencing significant responses to wet weather, it was confirmed that the council should acknowledge the original design criteria that went into these collection systems and use that as a threshold for communities to keep their wet weather flow, related flow within, and that anything that exceeded that again original design criteria or peak flow factor should be deemed as excessive. And in 2005, that formed the basis of really the council's ongoing I&I, regional I&I program. Let's see here. Oh, okay. So here's just a couple of photos to kind of give a sense of, what these sources look like. The top center view here, this is an actual televised inspection snapshot of a local line here in the Twin Cities, city of Burnsville, and it shows where a pipe is, the joint has opened up, and it's located below the groundwater table, so it's allowing pretty significant amounts of I&I into the system. This is a pretty severe case of infiltration source coming in. Generally, these can be drips or small little streams, but in some cases, the rate of water can be pretty significant, even in an inflow source. And then here on the upper right hand, this is a foundation drain, perimeter drain in a basement that drains to a floor drain that's connected to the sanitary sewer system. This is what we call a passive drain tile system. In a lot of older homes, it all operates by gravity. There's no need to pump this flow. In many of the older homes where this was common practice at the time the home was built, these homes can have finished basements, so a lot of times the property owners aren't even aware that these even exist. And depending on the soil conditions and the age of the home, these can contribute a pretty high rate and volume of clear water coming into the wastewater collection system. And of course, on the left here, I've got just a photo of a rain leader, just to point out that at one point in time, this was a very prevalent source of inflow coming into collection systems. Many of these have been eliminated, but historically, it was a very, very significant source. Sump pumps, center lower photo here. If sump pumps are directed to laundry tubs or to catch basins or something that in floor drains, I should say, in a basement. They can also contribute large volumes and rates of I&I into the system. These are prohibited by, excuse me, these are discharged for some pumps directed to the outside of the home. Oh, can you still hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, yeah,
Cutting out a little bit once in a while, not too bad though.
oh, okay, yeah, it looked like it had a message here that came up, but sometimes homeowners will redirect this flow into a laundry tub, and that can cause problems. So a lot of communities have implemented inspection programs where they look for illicit or non-compliant connections of some pumps into the wastewater collection system. Sometimes this will be covered under a point of sale program. If a property is going to goes up for sale, some communities will require an inspection before the home can be listed and corrected if non-compliant connections are found. And then the lower right here is a photo of an actual inflow source that was discovered probably about 4 or 5 years ago. We actually saw this flow. The flow was detected in one of our sanitary flow meters, and it was an interesting case where the temperature of the wastewater flow was actually noted. This occurred in March of the year, and the temperature was actually noted as being below what is common for wastewater flow. So the council rigged up a temperature sensor on a survey pole and took temperatures and traced the source of this cold water. And this was actually a structure that was located in a deep wetland complex, and the ice flow had we had a windy day, and there was a sheet of ice that knocked the cone right off the manhole structure below the water surface of the wetland. So significant. I think this was about 3 million gallons per day of inflow coming into the local collection system. So the point here being is that sometimes these can be extremely high volumes of flow coming into the collection system. And to put 3 MGD in perspective, that's about $6,000 of treatment of billing costs to the community each day. And then, of course, if we have excessive amounts of these types of sources that overtax the collection system, that can result in spills and overflows into the environment or backups into basements, leading to a negative impact on the public health, safety, and welfare of the public. So now I'll get into a little bit of the history of the regional I&I program. In the 1980s, the Environmental Protection Agency actually had grants available for local communities to do I&I studies, and this, I believe, was prompted by the Clean Water Act and a lot of the sewer separation work that was going on in the 80s. But a lot of communities here in the metro area did do I&I investigative work and reported the findings of that report in their comprehensive sewer plans that are required to be submitted to the council every 10 years. And then back in July of 1987, the region experienced a very significant storm event over the course of a week through 2 storms. Some areas of the region actually experienced 16 inches of rainfall. And if any of you were here during that time period, You'll remember it. I remember actually floating my car through an intersection. So it extremely significant rainfall, a large amount of flooding occurred. And at our Blue Lake facility, we've got a siphon that is located on the north side of the Minnesota River. And this is a facility that serves all of the Lake Minnetonka area, runs through Eden Prairie, it crosses the river, the Minnesota River, and then comes into the Blue Lake wastewater treatment plant. And as a result of that storm event and the excessive amounts of I&I, the facility failed. And the failure caused a rupture in the pipe, and as you can see here, it was about 40 feet deep at the point where it actually ruptured. And it caused the slope material to actually get washed out into the Minnesota River, along with, I forget, it was tens of millions of gallons per day of raw wastewater that ended up into the river. And this occurred for a number of weeks. It actually required that a purchase of special pumps out of Europe that was flown in on an emergency basis in order for us to set up a temporary conveyance system across the river and eliminate the discharge into the river. The home here, as you can see, was under construction, and there was actually on the news that actually showed parts of the building actually going down the hillside. So it was a very, very negative um, story, really, for the sewer board at the time. And this led to discussions with the Environmental Protection Agency that was headed for a consent decree. And so the council negotiated with the EPA and committed to doing a system evaluation. And in 1990, we completed that evaluation, found that about 20% of annual flow was originating from I&I, and committed to, identified approaches to address this, mitigating I&I sources from the system, so removing them, or building storage to accommodate it. And so it also set up a mechanism to incentivize local communities to do work. And then if that wasn't successful, the other option would be to place surcharges and fees on communities who are discharging excess amounts of I&I into the system. And so the council at the time, or the Metropolitan Waste Control Commission at the time, offered a number of grants between 1992 and 2000 to assist communities to evaluate sources and to also mitigate them. It was a little over $1 million that was offered to communities to do these activities and identify sources. And then in 2002, the council wanted to evaluate what the current condition was on the system's susceptibility on I&I, and to gauge the effectiveness of what the $1 million in grants resulted in. And so the 2002 Interceptor Master Plan, as we called it, identified that the system was still being impacted by excessive levels of I&I, and that if left unaddressed, we would not have the ability to accommodate future growth within the 7-county area. And then this was where it was discussed, the two approaches of source mitigation, source elimination, or building larger capacity to accommodate it. And it was decided that source mitigation was the more cost-effective approach to address the problem. for a number of reasons. There really hadn't been, and still is no good case studies where building additional capacity has eliminated overflows and backups in systems. So again, the council took an approach that was not common in the country in terms of addressing I&I. Some communities did do I&I mitigation work, but a lot of the large metropolitan areas did opt for the storage. Then in response to that 2002 Interceptor master plan study, the council formed a task force of local representatives to determine the best approach to address it. This first task force reaffirmed the approach of eliminating I&I sources from the system, and it indicated that it gave so much time, about 8 years, to re-examine the success, and if in 8 years it was determined that the system was still exceeding its wet weather discharges, then we would fall back on assigning surcharges and additional fees that would be collected by the region to then provide storage for excess flow. So it's the disincentive program that was identified back in the 1990 study. So the program started in 2004, the I&I program. In October of 2004, we had a very significant rainfall event that identified 55 communities who exceeded that I&I goal or that maximum discharge. Those communities then were notified of that excessive I&I. There was a formula that converted the excess amount of flow, the peak flow, that million gallons per day of excess flow, into a dollar amount of work. It was an estimation of what it would take to identify and mitigate. And then those communities were given a period of time to do the studies and to mitigate the work. And then we would continue to measure progress through the initial phase of this regional I&I program that ran through 2012, I believe it was. Then there was a second task force formed in 2009. The first task force, again, as I indicated, identified this possible for a demand charge if the successfulness of mitigation wasn't successful. And the task force recommended that the first phase, the first 5 or 6 year phase, be rolled into an ongoing mitigation program. So it deferred the demand charge out until some future date when basically all hope was given up and felt that we had to revert to a demand charge. So the plan was to continue notifying communities of excess I&I and allow them to continue to do work. And then in 2014, we had another very significant rainfall event, very similar to the one in October. I've got a chart here that kind of compares those two. A lot of communities, particularly around the Lake Minnetonka area, experience backups into basements. And because of virtue of their geographic location, there was also backup of wastewater into area lakes and streams. Then in 2016, it was the last I&I task force that was formed. Still, communities recognized the continued need for I&I mitigation efforts, but they also identified that there were additional tools that they needed to help educate the public on I&I sources. You know, what's acceptable in terms of sump pump discharges and the need to acknowledge that they have a pipe that's in their front yard that provides service to them, that those do deteriorate over time, and that there's a need to actually go in and evaluate the condition of those private services. And then it also recognized that there's a need for continued financial assistance to help both local communities on the public system and also private property owners to address I&I sources as well. And that kind of gets into, the amount of financial assistance that has been given to both communities and private property owners in the past. Through the I&I program, we collect information on the level or the amount of work that communities have done. And in that 17-year period between 2004 and 2020, communities have reported a little over $170 million in I&I mitigation work in the public collection system. During that same time period, the council has also looked at the regional collection system and has identified and mitigated sources in the regional system as well. And that equated to a little over $100 million during that period of time. And then getting at the public assistance in the 11 years between 2010 and 2020, the council, with the assistance of Metro Cities, was successful in obtaining a little over $24 million in public infrastructure bond funds for I&I grant mitigation. This is only in the public infrastructure. Bond monies can't be offered to private property repairs, which was one of the funding source shortfalls that was identified in the 2016 task force. And I think, let's see here, I think the $24 million was covered under a total, I think, of about 5 individual bond grant programs. And then we've, in the past, have attempted on a number of occasions to get funds out of the Clean Water Legacy program to fund specifically private property I&I mitigation. We were only successful once in $1 million program in 2013. The money was utilized within a 12-month period for private property work. These were pass-through grants through local communities, but the competition for Clean Water Legacy funds are very high, and we haven't had much success in securing any kind of dependable and reliable funding source out of the Clean Legacy funds for private property I&I. And so what, kind of doing a check on time here, it's 40 minutes, so still got 20. Just a couple of comparisons here. One of the questions is how much progress has been made since 2004? And so I indicated that in October of 2005 and June of 2014, we had 2 very significant rainfall events. They affected generally the whole regional system. The focus of the 2 storms, ironically, were in both of them were in the Lake Minnetonka Service District. But generally speaking, they did affect most of the 111 communities that we provide service to. The important thing to note here is that the June 2014 rainfall event, if you take a look at the amount of precipitation immediately preceding the event, the 2014 storm had about 62% more precipitation in the 1 to 2 weeks preceding the event. And then annualized, the 2014 storm event was preceded by 17% more annual precipitation. So not only was the storm larger in 2014, but the conditions leading up to it were wetter. However, the plant flows, if you take a look at the peak daily flows between those 2 time periods, there was a 6% reduction in the plant flow at Metro and a 24% reduction in the Blue Lake facility, which located in Shakopee and provides service to the Lake Minnetonka service area. So a very significant reduction in the daily peak flow between 2005 when the I&I program first started and 2014 when we had the last significant rainfall event. And then peak hourly flows, there was a reduction in the peak flow at the Metro plant at 12%. And unfortunately, the meters at the Blue Lake plant actually exceeded capacity. And so there's no way to really gauge if there was a reduction or not at the Blue Lake service area. There was a meter improvement that changed the conditions between 2004 and 2014. So there wasn't a way to really gauge what the impact was, but the one takeaway was that it was still excessive, that the flows coming into the Blue Lake still exceeded that average threshold that the original design of both the conveyance and treatment systems were designed under. And then if you just take a look at the volumetric flow during 2005 and 2020, you can see here that up until 2020 at least, we had a gradual trend of increasing precipitation within the region. But yet the regional flow has, for the most part, pretty much stayed steady. And when you consider that during this time period, the region has grown about 1% per year during this time period, it's a pretty significant that the fact that the flow has remained pretty steady, and I think that's attributable to a couple of factors. I think water conservation is probably a huge factor here, but also I think it's safe to assume that the fact that the region has been doing I&I mitigation work for the past 15 years or more at a pretty significant rate also plays a part in the fact that the work that has been done has offset the growth that the region has seen in this last in the 15-year period here. So then one of the recommendations of the task force was really focused on the fact that there wasn't any reliable dedicated sources for private property mitigation work. And so the second sentence here in this recommendation of the task force was that the council should consider the provision of financial assistance through regional sources, and it specifically identified the wastewater fee as a means of providing assistance to communities to address private property I&I mitigation. So this was the 2016 report. And so there was an existing statute that was actually proposed by the city of Duluth in 1994 that allowed cities to establish I&I prevention programs and make grants and loans available to property owners using internal funding sources. And so in 2021, the council sponsored an initiative to include under the definition of city to include townships or any other political subdivision of the state with statutory authority, ownership and responsibility, with the statutory sewer ownership and operational responsibilities. As I indicated, that we first sponsored the bill in 2001, it didn't pass. But in this last legislative session, the bill did pass, and the law was signed by Governor Walz in April of this year. And so by having this definition of city change, not only allows the council to use its revenue sources to develop an I&I grant program, but it also allows other sanitary sewer districts within the state to do the same. And so to name a couple, we've got Western Lake Superior, Alexandria, and Moose Lake Whittemere sanitary sewer districts that also could benefit from the statute change. And so moving forward, we are in the process of soliciting representatives to sit on what will be the fourth I&I task force that will help the council develop a grant program. Uh, the representatives will include a mix of municipal engineers, public works staff, staff from finance, building officials, also community development representative. We want somebody with that hat on this task force. And also a town administrator, city administrators and town board chairs. We've got identified, and then also we've been in touch with Metro Cities, who really has been kind of a champion on behalf of the council to get stuff through the legislators, and also provide that perspective of local communities that that will be impacted and benefit from this program. I believe that just this week we sent out a request of individuals, and I think we've gotten 100% acceptance, except from one individual who said they were actually going to be retiring at the first of the year. So they named a replacement. So I think all of the requests that went out has been accepted. So we're also hoping that the representation on this task force will represent a mix of different communities. Minneapolis, St. Paul, our two largest customers in our system, will be represented, as well as cities and townships that are evenly dispersed geographically. We want small communities and large communities to be represented, and those that are impacted by I&I, and also those that are not impacted. We want to make sure that that we hear and listen from those where a private property grant program may not be beneficial to them specifically, but maybe in the long run, if the system wide excess I&I can be eliminated, then that will benefit even those communities who are not impacted by excess I&I. And then older and new communities, outer ring communities versus core communities also are represented in this group. And then I think lastly here, just the time schedule for developing this task force. As indicated, we're wrapping up the solicitation of representatives. This will go before our chair to recommend membership. First meetings will probably start in November. We'll run through the first couple of months of next year. This will help us identify the size, the funding source, and the mechanisms in which these grants will be offered. It will require a public hearing probably in the fall of next year, with hopes of making available a grant program starting in January of 2024. And with that, that wraps up my presentation. A couple of minutes for questions, Mark.
Yeah, if people want to just plug in questions into the chat, that would be great. We have, I think it was Karsten, said here he lost the last 45 seconds of what you said about sump pumps. If you just want to reiterate that real quickly, we all might benefit from that.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, sump pumps can be a major contributing source of inflow in some communities, and the proper way to handle the discharge of these sump pumps is either one, route the flow out the outside of the home so it can discharge into the yard. This generally is clean water. It doesn't need to be treated through the treatment system. Or the second, some communities will provide an actual utility connection specifically for sump pump connections out at the street, particularly in communities where there's a high prevalence of sump pumps, and having these discharged to the outside can cause some localized flooding, maybe even some public safety issues in the winter, they'll provide this connection. And so some homeowners not liking the wet conditions that these discharges can cause in the yard area will redirect these into laundry tubs or the floor drain system. So a lot of communities will have periodic inspection programs to make sure that they are being routed to the proper areas, because this flow adds to a community's total volume of flow, which affects their billing. And these connections are prohibited by current state plumbing code. I think that's what I mentioned.
Hmm. Paul Gardner asks, could you compare the efficacy of Met Council's approach to reduce I&I with Chicago's storage approach, if you have any insight to that?
Well, yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I can't speak much regarding Chicago, but I am familiar with Detroit efforts, Cincinnati, specifically Milwaukee, and I do know that in Milwaukee's case, and I believe Cincinnati's case, that both those metropolitan areas uh, um, address the issue with storage. And I know up in Milwaukee, they had completed their deep tunnel storage facility, spent about $1 billion, I believe, in building that. And shortly after that facility was commissioned, within a year or two, had a bypass to Lake Michigan, and did result in a subsequent lawsuit from the city of Chicago. So we have not had to build storage. Back in 2005, we had identified that in order to accommodate the future growth and the existing levels of I&I, that we would have to actually build to build storage would cost about over $1 billion to build storage. And it's important to note that, this would be facilities that are used maybe once, twice a year. And if the storage was actually built at our treatment plant sites, for instance, at Metro Plant, these facilities would take land areas that essentially are being planned for future capacity enhancement. So in essence, building storage at the Metro Plant has the effect of actually derating the plant for any future improvements that could accommodate growth. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, Karen Evans has a question, or a comment rather. The new funding opportunity is exciting and encouraging. Wondering about your views on changing climate issues as relates to I&I imagine.
Yes, it's actually a topic of a lot of discussion here, both inside the council and other state agencies. And I think it's an acknowledged fact that climate change will bring more significant storm events. Maybe not, perhaps drier duration, longer durations of climate, but I think stronger storm events are pretty much a given. I think we're seeing them across the country, and so eliminating this water from getting into the system is a way of 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 um, addressing climate change, the impact that climate change can have on wastewater collection systems. So there are other issues too, I think, that also need to be considered. I think with severe storms, you've got electrical storms that can cause power outages, um, heat, high heat, you can have brownouts. And a lot of our facilities rely on electricity for treatment and for conveyance, like at lift stations. So it's not just water, but there are other impacts that climate can have on the wastewater collection systems. And the council has been discussing those various impacts that climate change might have.
Randy Thorson asks if we have any estimates on the percent of volume of I&I that might come from private service connections. Any insight into that?
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Good to hear from you. We did, it's, we did the last comprehensive plan go around. We did ask communities to try and put an estimate on that source coming from private property in their comprehensive sewer plans. It's very difficult to do that. Um, there isn't a really good way of separating out the flows coming from public and private. But I can say that most of the communities have stated that at least half of the existing I&I that's originating in communities, and this is on average, of course, but on average, about half of the I&I does come from private property. But it is a very difficult thing to really truly quantify. The council did give the city of St. Paul a grant to do a study that tries to do exactly that. It's an older part of St. Paul, neighborhoods built in the 40s and 50s, a couple of homes even in the 20s. They're collecting flow data and then going prior to improvements and then going in and making private service line repairs and then going back and measuring I&I after the project. They're in the process of actually making the improvements now. COVID kind of put a 2-year pause on that project. They couldn't go and have interviews with private property owners or actually enter the home to do these private service inspections. But we are hoping that the study will at least help us quantify what the effectiveness is on focusing just on private property mitigation.
Yeah, we have a couple of more questions here. People are posting, do most of your communities have point of sale service lateral inspection upgrade requirements?
Uh, I would say no, not most, but it is becoming more and more prevalent. I would say 10 years ago, we probably had maybe 2 communities. I know St. Anthony was one community that was kind of an early adopter of point of sale. They had those passive foundation drain tile connections, and so they implemented a program. Since then, there are more that are doing so. Golden Valley, West St. Paul, I believe Maple Plain. So there's probably maybe a dozen communities out there that I'm aware of, at least, that have a point of sale program that they're actively administrating.
Right. So Justin asks, any ballpark energy consumption costs for simply moving the wastewater and or extra I&I throughout the MCES collection areas to treatment plants? And I think Justin kind of reflects one thing I was thinking is, I think most Minnesotans don't realize how costly it is to pump all of the water to the treatment system. A reduction in I&I should equate to a reduction in energy costs and result in lowered greenhouse gas emissions from energy production. Is that right? Right way of thinking about it,
It,
Kyle?
yeah, it is a correct thing to consider. I'm not aware of any um, uh, detailed analysis that gives us an energy savings, but there definitely is one that gets experienced by having less flow in the system. If there's less flow there, to have to pump or to run through a treatment system, that there's going to be an energy savings associated with that. That one chart that I showed showed that the regional flow has been kind of steady, makes it a little bit a little bit more difficult to try and annualize an energy savings. It's a good question, and one that I don't believe we've actually quantified.
Right. Carl Stenuin asks a question that also crossed my mind lately, and I know we've studied that here a little bit in the past, but he asks, in the case of broken or unsealed seams in underground pipes, is the flow of untreated sewage out of the pipes as big of a problem as the infiltration into it? Presumably, there are multiple costs, financial or otherwise, with leaky pipes beyond I&I. That's an interesting question to ask, as well as the problem that you're dealing with, which is the water coming into the pipes.
Right. And in gravity systems, that's not, the prevalence is for the flow to come from the surrounding soils into the collection system. Now there's one example I know in Golden Valley where they were televising a line, and there was basically an underground void surrounding the pipe. The part of the pipe had collapsed and then washed away, and there was a short little chasm, if you will, between where this void was and were in the two sections of pipe. So in that case, yeah, there was probably some underground wastewater in this private service that was collecting in this underground void. And then, the level would reach to the point where then it would flow out of, on the other side of the void and continue to the connection out in the street. So it can happen, but by and large, the majority of the flow is coming from outside the pipe and in the pipe, and not the other way around
Mm.
in the gravity systems.
Well, that's all the questions we have posted in chat.
Okay.
Um, Kyle, thanks so much for agreeing to speak to us about this really important issue. It seems to me that not many people are aware of this problem and how much it costs us to deal with it. So thanks for telling us about it today.
Great. It was my pleasure to be here. And if anyone has any questions, check out our website. You can contact me directly or Mark if people want to pass additional questions or afterthoughts through you to get to me. That'll work too.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thanks everyone for coming today. And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks when we have our next seminar. Thanks again, Kyle.
Yep. Thank you.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.